And we get a great new book here.
We
Search
do.
for Meaning in the Material World. Spiritual, but not religious.
But not religious. Father John Bartunek is familiar to Catholic TV viewers from his Retreat Guide series, and today he's joining us via Skype from the Detroit area to talk about, as Bishop Reed just mentioned, the book that he is holding right in his hand right there. Thank you so much for being with us, Father.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Now, you were raised an evangelical Christian, but at one point you were an atheist and now a religious order priest. Tell us about how that all came about.
Actually, it was the other way around for me. I grew up in a family with no faith at all. My dad was an atheist, and we never had any faith formation. I was definitely a nun.
Yeah.
I didn't have any religious affiliation, never had. And then when I was a teenager, I was invited to go to an evangelical church, non-denominational, and that's where I had my first experience of faith, and Jesus became a real person to me there. And then when I was in college, I was a history major, and I went overseas a little bit. I started running into the Catholic Church through my history studies, and little by little fell in love, especially through the art, the richness of the history, and that's where my vocation to the priesthood and religious life really kind of took root.
Wow.
Now, this book, I understand, was prompted, speaking of art, by tours of Detroit Art Museum. Can you tell us about that? Am I correct on that, John?
Yeah, so it's kind of the remote origins of this book. I started kind of offering some tours of the Detroit Institute of Arts, which were called spiritual and religious. So the idea was to actually uncover the beauty of the great art of our tradition and understand how that can enrich us. Because whenever, beauty, truth, and goodness, that's how God speaks to us, right? And so I did some tours with some people. Actually, it was an auction item at a fundraiser the first time I did it. And we had about 12 or 13 people. And I went around and we actually looked at works of art that weren't even Christian. And I kind of explained what the artist had in mind, what they were getting at. And then we would initiate a discussion about the different works of art. And it was amazing. I mean, the discussions we had about the connections between the beauty in this art and how that spirituality of that beauty could actually enrich our own religious life was amazing. So then we kept doing those tours, and gradually the resonance or the connection that I had with people who were living their faith and who weren't living their faith kind of said, well, gosh, this might be a great way to open up this topic. And so that was the origin of the book.
We were talking about surveys earlier, too, about the Real Presence surveys, but also the many surveys that are coming out about the largest religious identity group now, as you mentioned, the nuns, N-O-N-E-S. And these are some of the same people who say they're spiritual but not religious. And can you share with us some of the spirituality you encountered during the writing of this book?
Yeah, so I run into that. You've probably run into people who said that I'm spiritual but not religious. I ran into it from the very beginning of my priesthood, but recent years I've run into it more and more. People saying I'm spiritual but not religious. And it became so frequent that I started, at first people would say that kind of as a shield, Father, I'm spiritual but I'm not religious. I don't. But it started coming up more and more. So I started really engaging in dialogue with people. I said, well, tell me what you mean about that. Tell me about your spiritual experience. And that led to some amazing conversations, which continued to kind of make me think, I think instead of that being a shield, if someone says I'm spiritual but not religious, maybe we could turn that into a bridge. And so that, again, was one of the reasons that I decided to write this book. I found that people, if they've really had a spiritual experience, that can be a place where you connect with them and maybe help them take a step back towards Jesus, towards the church, whatever their background might be.
If I could just make a quick confession here to you, though. Sometimes I must admit I'm very religious, but not all that spiritual. Isn't that possible, too, kind of as a flip side of the argument?
Well, that's one of the main reasons I've found why people say they're spiritual but not religious. Because they've run into people who claim to be religious but don't show any deep spiritual resonance, don't kind of show in their lives that they're kind of maybe hypocritical, like the Pharisees sometimes. I mean, we can all be that way, right? But they've encountered people who claim to be religious but don't show a deep experience of God. It's like about following the rules maybe, but there's no sense of real compassion or connection. And so they say, well, I actually don't want that kind of religion. It's kind of a one-dimensional religion, right? So one of the big themes of this book is how true spirituality should always be connected with true religion, and true religiousness or religiosity should always be connected with a true spirituality.
Father John, what a great book for families gathering throughout the upcoming holidays. People of faith, people who are seeking God. Where can people get a copy?
Yeah, that's a great book for this time of year. You know, we're all going to have family gatherings, and this book can help people, faithful Catholics, have a vocabulary to actually engage in fruitful discussions with people who might have left the faith or kind of consider themselves spiritual but not religious. So you can find this book wherever you buy books, but this book and a lot of other materials is available at rcspirituality.org. We even have some online do-it-yourself Advent retreats there at rcspirituality.org.
Fantastic. So great to have you with us in the living room. I hope you have a very peaceful and holy Advent and a Merry Christmas, John.